Get ready for some spine-chilling dramatized Bigfoot stories and encounters from the 1960s and 1970s. These tales of mysterious sightings and eerie experiences will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps me continue my thrilling Bigfoot research and share these incredible discoveries with you. Thank you for being a part of the adventure. 1. The Silent Watcher at the Crater Lake Campground, 1967, Oregon. Crater Lake National Park, with its deep blue waters and towering pines, has always held an air of mystery. But in the summer of 1967, one forest ranger's encounter would forever alter the peaceful reputation of the park's southern campgrounds. Ranger Carl Forrester had been on patrol for most of the evening, ensuring that visitors were adhering to the park's rules regarding fire safety and wildlife awareness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of purple and orange, Carl took a moment to sit near the Crater Lake trailhead, not far from the Mazama campground. It was a peaceful time, until the sounds of the forest fell into an eerie silence. Carl noticed the sudden change immediately. The usual chorus of crickets and birds ceased, as if someone had flipped a switch. The air became unnaturally still, making Carl feel uneasy. He reached for his flashlight, scanning the surrounding forest, but nothing seemed out of place. The light revealed only dense underbrush and towering trees. But still, something felt wrong. As he began to make his way back to the main trail, Carl heard a deep, guttural sound, a noise he had never encountered before in his years patrolling Crater Lake. It was neither a bear's growl nor an elk's bugle, but something far more unsettling. The sound emanated from deeper in the woods, just beyond the tree line, and it echoed through the stillness like a warning. Instinctively, Carl quickened his pace, but as he turned, his flashlight beam caught something that made him freeze in place. A pair of eyes reflecting the light, watching him from within the forest. They were large, set high off the ground, and they didn't belong to any animal Carl could recognize. The figure was too far back in the shadows to make out its full shape, but Carl could tell it was massive. It stood upright, and its presence was suffocating, as though the forest itself had come alive. Without taking his eyes off the figure, Carl slowly backed away. His breath caught in his throat as the creature took a step forward. He heard the unmistakable crunch of branches under its feet, confirming that it was far heavier and larger than any human. For what felt like an eternity, Carl stood frozen, locked in a staring contest with the creature. Then, without warning, it turned and melted into the shadows of the forest, leaving Carl standing alone, drenched in cold sweat. He never saw the figure again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something unnatural had been watching him that night. Other rangers later reported strange occurrences: large, human-like footprints near the campgrounds, unusual noises in the dead of night, and the eerie feeling of being watched. But none could compare to Carl's chilling encounter with the Silent Watcher of Crater Lake. 2. The Ranger's Cabin Encounter, 1972, Northern California. The year was 1972, and Ranger Jennifer Holloway had been stationed at a remote ranger cabin in the Shasta Trinity National Forest located in Northern California. This region was known for its rugged beauty and was a popular spot for campers, hikers, and nature enthusiasts. But there were also darker rumors that swirled around the forest, whispers of strange creatures spotted in the distance, unsettling howls in the night, and large, mysterious footprints found near rivers and streams. Jennifer had heard the stories, but she had never put much stock in them. She was practical, grounded in her understanding of wildlife and nature. But her skepticism would soon be challenged. It was a quiet evening in late June. The campgrounds had been cleared for the night, and Jennifer was finishing her rounds before retreating to the cabin for some rest. The sun had long set, and the only sounds were the crackling of her campfire and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. The temperature dropped as the darkness deepened, and Jennifer huddled closer to the fire, staring into the dancing flames. Suddenly, a deep, low howl echoed through the forest. It wasn't a coyote or a wolf. It was far deeper, almost like the bellow of a large primate. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat. She stood up and grabbed her flashlight, scanning the tree line beyond the cabin. The howling continued, getting closer with each passing moment. Her pulse quickened as she began to hear heavy footsteps approaching. Whatever it was big, and it was coming right toward the cabin. Jennifer flicked on her flashlight and aimed it toward the source of the noise. The beam of light swept across the trees before landing on something that made her blood run cold. Standing just outside the reach of the light was a massive, hulking figure covered in dark hair. Its eyes glinted in the beam, reflecting the firelight as it stared directly at her. The creature stood upright, its broad shoulders and muscular frame towering over anything Jennifer had ever seen in the wild. It seemed to regard her with a mix of curiosity and caution, swaying slightly as it shifted its weight from foot to foot. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest. She slowly backed toward the cabin door, keeping the flashlight trained on the figure. But as she moved, the creature let out another low howl, this time louder and more menacing. It took a step forward, and Jennifer knew she had to act fast. She bolted for the cabin, slamming the door shut behind her. She could hear the heavy footfalls of the creature outside, circling the cabin. Her hands trembled as she locked the door, her back pressed against the wood. She stood in silence, listening to the sound of the creature's breathing and movement just outside the walls. After what felt like hours, the footsteps grew distant. The creature had moved on. The next morning, Jennifer found large footprints surrounding the cabin. They were over a foot long and far too wide to belong to any human. She reported the incident to her superiors, but they dismissed it as a bear or an exaggerated account of a wild animal encounter. But Jennifer knew better. She had come face to face with something beyond explanation, something that wasn't supposed to exist. 3. The Shadow in the Trees. 1975 Olympic National Park. Olympic National Park is known for its vast rainforests and towering trees that seem to stretch endlessly into the sky. But for Ranger Tom McGrath, the park became a place of unease after his encounter in the summer of 1975. Tom was no stranger to the wilderness. He had been a ranger for over a decade and had spent countless nights patrolling the campgrounds, ensuring the safety of visitors and wildlife. But that summer, strange reports began to surface. Campers claiming they had heard strange noises at night, large shapes moving through the trees, and even glimpses of something large and dark watching from the shadows. Tom was skeptical, but the reports kept coming. So one night, he decided to patrol the Hoh Rainforest campground, where most of the sightings had been reported. It was late, past midnight, and the campgrounds were silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Tom walked the trail with his flashlight, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. But everything seemed normal, until he reached the edge of the forest, where the trees grew thick and the underbrush was dense. There, at the edge of the forest, Tom saw movement. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, shadows shifting as the flashlight beam moved across the trees. But then he saw it again, a tall, dark figure, standing just beyond the tree line, watching him. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He aimed the flashlight directly at the figure, but it didn't move. The figure was massive, its silhouette clearly visible against the backdrop of the trees. It stood at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung at its sides. Tom called out, thinking it might be a lost camper or a prankster. But the figure remained silent, unmoving. Slowly, Tom began to approach, his hand resting on the radio at his belt, ready to call for backup if necessary. But as he drew closer, the figure stepped back into the trees, disappearing into the dense foliage with an unnatural speed. Tom froze. He had only caught a brief glimpse, but it was enough to send a chill down his spine. Whatever it wasn't human. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck standing on end as the forest around him grew eerily quiet. He retreated back to the campground, his flashlight scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. But the figure was gone, leaving behind only the unsettling feeling of being watched. Tom never saw the figure again, but the reports continued. Campers claimed to hear strange howls in the night, and large footprints were found near the trailhead. Though he never spoke of the encounter to the public, Tom became convinced that something not of this world, was stalking the forests of Olympic National Park. 4. The Midnight Visitor. 1969 Yosemite National Park. Yosemite National Park has always been a place of beauty and wonder, but in the summer of 1969, it became the site of a terrifying encounter for Ranger Bill Dawson. It was late June, and the campgrounds were filled with visitors eager to explore the park's breathtaking landscapes. Ranger Bill Dawson was making his usual rounds, ensuring that campers were adhering to the park's regulations. The night had been uneventful, with only the sound of crackling campfires and distant laughter filling the air. But as midnight approached, something changed. Bill had been patrolling the Upper Pines campground when he noticed a strange smell in the air, a pungent, musky odor that he had never encountered before. It was overpowering, almost as if a wet animal had been rolling in the dirt nearby. He slowed his pace and turned on his flashlight, scanning the trees for the source of the stench. As he moved deeper into the campground, the smell grew stronger. Bill's instincts told him that something wasn't right. The night, which had been filled with the sounds of nature, had gone completely silent. Even the occasional chirp of crickets had ceased. He tightened his grip on his flashlight and continued down the path, his eyes darting around for any sign of movement. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A large, dark figure stood between two trees at the edge of the campground, illuminated only briefly by the flickering flames of a nearby campfire. The figure was massive, standing well over 8 feet tall. Its broad shoulders and thick, muscular build made it look like a giant standing among the trees. Bill froze, his heart racing. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching. Bill slowly raised his flashlight, aiming it at the creature. But before the beam could fully illuminate it, the figure turned and disappeared into the trees with an unnatural grace. Bill's heart pounded in his chest as he rushed toward the spot where the figure had stood. But when he reached it, there was nothing there, only the lingering scent of musk and the feeling of being watched. He searched the area for signs of the creature, but there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to indicate that anything had been there at all. Bill quickly returned to the ranger station, where he relayed his encounter to the other rangers. While some of his colleagues believed he had seen a bear, Bill knew better. The creature he had seen was no bear. It walked upright, its movements too deliberate, too human-like to be anything else. For the rest of the summer, campers reported strange occurrences in the Upper Pines campground. Large, human-like footprints were found near the river, and on several occasions, campers claimed to hear deep guttural growls in the dead of night. Bill never saw the creature again, but the memory of that midnight visitor stayed with him for the rest of his life. 5. The Ridge Runner of Mount Hood, 1978, Oregon. Mount Hood National Forest is a sprawling wilderness known for its scenic beauty and popular campgrounds. But in the summer of 1978, something far less inviting was roaming the ridges and valleys, something that would leave a lasting impression on Ranger David Michaels. David had been working as a forest ranger for over a decade, stationed in different parts of Oregon, but nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered that summer. It was early August, and David was patrolling the Lost Lake campground, which was known for its picturesque views and peaceful atmosphere. The first report came from a group of campers who claimed they had heard something large moving around their tent in the middle of the night. They described the sound as heavy, deliberate footsteps, almost as if someone, or something, was circling their campsite. When they emerged from their tent to investigate, they found nothing but large footprints leading away from the campsite and into the dense forest. David initially dismissed the report as a bear encounter, but when he visited the site the next morning, he saw the footprints for himself. They were massive, easily twice the size of a human foot, and the depth of the prints suggested whatever made them was extremely heavy. What puzzled him most was the gait. Bears walk on all fours, but these tracks were distinctly bipedal. Over the next few nights, more reports came in from campers and hikers in the area. Some described hearing strange howls echoing through the trees, while others claimed to have seen a large dark figure moving swiftly through the forest. The locals began referring to the creature as the Ridge Runner, a name that stuck after several witnesses claimed to see the creature moving along the ridges surrounding the campground. David decided to stake out the area one night, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was causing the disturbance. He set up a small observation post on a ridge overlooking the campground, with a clear view of the surrounding forest. Armed with his binoculars and a sense of curiosity, David settled in for a long night. For hours, nothing happened. The night was still, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. But just as David was beginning to think the reports were nothing more than overactive imaginations, he heard it. A low, deep growl, so faint he almost missed it. He scanned the forest below with his binoculars, searching for the source of the noise, and then he saw it. A massive figure was moving through the trees, its silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, and its long arms swung at its sides as it walked. David's heart raced as he watched the creature move with an eerie grace, disappearing and reappearing between the trees. Suddenly, the creature stopped and turned its head, as if sensing it was being watched. David froze, barely daring to breathe. The creature stood still for what felt like an eternity before letting out a low, guttural growl that echoed across the ridge. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature turned and vanished into the forest, leaving David alone on the ridge, shaken and bewildered. The next morning, David returned to the area where he had seen the creature. Once again, he found large footprints in the dirt, leading away from the ridge and deeper into the forest. He took plaster casts of the prints and filed a report with his superiors, but the evidence was inconclusive. The Ridge Runner sightings continued throughout the summer, but no one ever got as close as David did that night. To this day, the identity of the creature remains a mystery, but the legend of the Ridge Runner lives on, haunting the campgrounds of Mount Hood. These 5 stories capture the eerie and unsettling encounters that forest rangers and campers had with Bigfoot during the 1960s and 1970s. From the remote wilderness of Oregon to the towering trees of Yosemite, these sightings remain some of the most mysterious and unexplained events in the history of Bigfoot lore. Again, thanks for visiting, and if you liked these stories and would like to see more, please consider subscribing, liking, and clicking the bell.